Imagine living your life after 50 and feeling energized and excited about your future. Welcome to the Women in the Middle podcast, the podcast for women who are ready to figure out what they want and create the life they deserve. Here's your host and master certified life coach, Susie Rosenstein.
Hey there, today's episode is all about shining a light on family caregivers in midlife. Let's go. Welcome back to the podcast Women in the Middle. I'm your host, Susie Rosenstein, your master certified coach and midlife mentor, and I'm so glad to be here with you again for this week's episode, which is all about being a family caregiver and specifically a working family caregiver in midlife. So is this you, or has this been you? For sure, you probably know somebody now who is a family caregiver because it is so common, and it looks like this trend isn't going anywhere. Being a working family caregiver can be an incredibly challenging time of your life and one that puts you at a high chance for burnout. We're going to go into all of this today as we shine an important light on this whole topic. But just quick, before we dive into that, I have a free gift for you. It is perfect when you feel a bit stuck and would love some clarity about how to make your next chapter more fun and fulfilling. It's super helpful because you will discover how to get unstuck and feel happier in midlife. You'll create more confidence so you can capitalize on your newfound clarity and what you want. And finally, you will connect with your heart and find yourself again. This free guide is your golden ticket to getting unstuck. It's called the Top 10 Questions to Reimagine Your Life After 50. And it's waiting for you at www.susierosenstein.com/10 questions. You can download it there. Enjoy. Now let me tell you about my amazing guest today, Christa Haanstra. With over 25 years of experience as a senior healthcare leader, Christa is the founding and managing director of 4C Strategy Group, a company dedicated to advancing meaningful change in healthcare by partnering with organizations to ensure lived experience of patients, residents, clients, and caregivers are central to decision-making. Fueled by her deep belief in the power of storytelling to drive transformation, Christa has created the 4C Impact Narrative approach. This proprietary method uses collaboration, co-design, compassion, and creativity to inspire complex changes. Christa is a caregiver to her 73-year-old father who has late-stage Alzheimer's. Through constant service navigation and advocacy, she strives to create a supportive environment that allows him to thrive. When not at work, Christa loves to walk, travel, and do puzzles, and is an avid nature photographer. She currently lives in Guelph with her husband, her teenage daughter, and a rambunctious rescue dog named Lightning. I know you're going to get a lot out of this amazing and authentic interview, so please enjoy. Hi, Christa. Thanks so much for joining me today on the Women in the Middle podcast.
Hi, Susie. I'm so thrilled to be here and to talk to you again.
Oh my gosh, we haven't seen each other in, I think, 20 years, where we worked in the same department. It's so fun to see you again and to learn about what you're up to. So I saw you on LinkedIn and I'm like, oh my gosh, she knows all about the caregiving thing. We need to talk more about that on the podcast. You are perfect for that. So let's get started with you talking a little bit about how you either were in a funk or how you got unstuck. This is a common thing that goes on in midlife. Something happens where we know we're just not where we want to be, and what helped you move forward. So what was that like for you?
Well, for me, I became a mom much later in life after many years of infertility. We adopted our daughter, which felt like having that new lease on life. And I have to say, going back to work after having a child, having been in the workforce for a solid 15 years, going back to work as a working mom was probably the hardest thing I ever had to do. So that was an interesting period for me. And it happened then to coincide with my dad's diagnosis with frontal temporal lobe dementia. So that was almost 10 years ago, and those two things came together at the same time, and it never occurred to me that I'd be a young mom caring for a parent at the same time. That was a big surprise for me, and I needed to figure that out.
Wow. We like to call that a wake-up call. Wake-up calls are jarring and yeah, very unexpected. And then they usually require a lot of brainwaves to sort it out and figure out how you're going to proceed. So how did you start to figure that out?
Well, interestingly, I went from being traditionally employed. I decided that I should be self-employed because it would give me more flexibility. Of course, I thought I would work less. That's a big joke for anyone who's self-employed. I did not work less, but I did work differently. And I would say that has been my saving grace through my entire parenting and caregiving journey because it gives me the flexibility to be where I need to be when I need to be there and to work when I need to work, which means that I'm not always working in that 9 to 5 slot. I'm working when I can fit it in. I definitely don't work less. I definitely don't output less. I just do it all differently. And that's what saved me as a working mom and a working caregiver.
Now, did you think that was okay? Did that epiphany come to you quickly, or were you trying to cram it in during 9 to 5?
Oh no, that epiphany came to me quickly. But I will say I literally thought being self-employed would not just give me the flexibility, it would give me more time, and the latter was not true. But the flexibility was true. So early on, like when I first started working for myself, I would be up at 6 a.m. and I'd work between 6 and 8 and I'm not a morning person, because Alexis wouldn't get up until 8. And then obviously, like, as you know, in those young ages, like things shift very regularly. I'm also a night owl, so it would be not unusual to see me sit down and start working at 9 p.m. to output something before I went to bed. That's very normal for me. I still do that. But that epiphany came to me right away. I just never worked. I never forced myself to work the 9 to 5.
So in order for the epiphany to have come in so clearly, you need to be crystal clear about your priorities.
Yeah, and super organized. Like the reality is doctor's appointments don't happen in the evening or early morning or on the weekend. They happen during the day. That's just a reality. And so yeah, I had to just shift things around. Like when my dad was first diagnosed, honestly, he was still working. The reason we found out that something wasn't right is he was a member of a senior management team, and the CEO called us and said something's going on. And we didn't even see it at home, or my mom didn't see it at home. And so we would meet literally with the CEO, with him, my mom, and me in order to figure out how to be able to work with him to retire with dignity before things got worse. Like there were so many things that I just needed to like fit in. I have a million pictures of me working because every time I work somewhere weird, I take a picture because I'm literally, the other day I was sitting on a bench in downtown Guelph with my laptop, sending emails while we're waiting for a store to open so that I could get something done before. Literally, I do it all the time.
Oh, I love that you are documenting it. That is brilliant. That's brilliant. I heard a story recently where somebody was sending an email from a pool. And I thought, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it happens all the time. I mean, through COVID, I was often sitting in the backyard around the pool because the kids were in the pool. That was a safe place to be. And I was working beside the pool a lot. That's just the way it goes. But I have funny pictures of where I am while I'm working. Yeah, just it's par for the course being self-employed and being a working caregiver where you just need to fit it all in. And I like to work that way. It works for me.
Now, is there anything you had to do or purchase or prepare or sign up for that helps you be that way, that helps you do your work that way?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't go anywhere without my laptop. And that maybe sounds crazy, but I literally, if there's 5 minutes, I'm going to get something done in those 5 minutes. If I were to lose my laptop, I'd be in deep trouble. But I will say I moved from, a really big MacBook Pro to a MacBook Air because it was just that much lighter and I could literally carry it with me. And I have a bag that it fits in perfectly. And when I go without my laptop, if it happens, I always regret it because I'm like, oh man, I could have got that thing done. Oh, I could have sent that email off. Oh, I've got 10 minutes I could be doing. Like that's literally my life.
I love that you said that because I've noticed recently I have Apple phone and I have an iPad, but I don't have an Apple computer because my whole family doesn't do Apple.
Oh,
So like in the whole family printer and the system and the people who can help me around the house, with computer issues, although the advice is always reboot. But
yes.
other than that, anyway, so I realized that my computer is a little too big to be comfortable traveling with. And it's too heavy to be in a shoulder bag for me. It needs to be in a wheelie.
Yeah.
But I also prefer to have it even if I don't need it. But when I need it, I absolutely prefer it. So I was talking about that the next computer has to be smaller, regardless. It just has to be.
Well, I highly recommend this one. It's light as a feather, it's very thin, and it actually fits into a stylish leather bag that can be both a backpack and a shoulder bag. So there you
Oh,
go.
beautiful. You solved the problem. That's awesome. So tell me then, how did you get involved professionally with caregiving?
Well, that's an interesting story. And I will say, seems to me that everything I work in seems to become my life at some point. So that's kind of what happened here. To some degree. So you know me professionally as someone who works in strategic communications, and I did that in healthcare for many years. And then when I transitioned on my own, I focused on strategic comms too. But then I worked with an organization that was really kind of on the precipice of co-design and engagement, which is like these fancy words for basically working very closely with people with lived experience, in this case, patients and caregivers. And I was able to, the concept of working collaboratively with patients and caregivers came very intuitively to me from my strategic comms background. And the way of pulling out themes from what I was hearing when we were working with someone also came very intuitively to me. And then I just built my capacity in working very closely in co-design and engagement with patients and caregivers. And it was at that same time that my dad was like early, we were still trying to figure out what was happening with him. We'd had the call from his boss, but we weren't quite sure. I didn't even think about myself as a caregiver at that point, which, by the way, most people don't.
Interesting.
The research shows that most people don't self-identify as a family caregiver until they're at point of burnout, which is a real problem because you need to figure out how to care for yourself early on, or you're going to burn out faster. And actually, I just heard yesterday when I was meeting with the Caregiver Association here in Ontario, the data shows that it used to take 5 years to get to burnout, and now it's 2 years.
Whoa.
So we're talking about, and burnout is real. Like I've seen it. I mean, I've experienced it, but I've seen it, especially in full-time caregivers. Like I'm not the full-time primary caregiver to my dad. My mom is. And I mean, we'd seen it coming slowly, and it just keeps building up and building up. And once you're at a point of burnout, being able to replenish your stores doesn't happen easily.
Now, tell me more about what do you think the resistance is all about with not self-identifying as a caregiver? Is it lack of preparation or is it just shifting an identity? What is it?
Okay, I think this is a great question, and it's multifactorial, I think. Okay, first of all, who values caregiving in our society?
Women.
It's women, but also women, it's not valued work, even
No.
by women sometimes. It's not highly valued. It's incredibly important. Listen, if our family caregivers went on strike tomorrow, the whole healthcare system would come to its knees. Like it would not function. 75% of care happens outside of formalized healthcare settings. That's the family caregiver. So if they stopped caring, where would the people go when they leave hospital? What would they do when they left their family doctor and needed to get medication and integrate new therapies into their daily lives? It wouldn't happen. So the whole system would come to a halt. But we don't value it as a society. It's considered women's work, which is in and of itself considered less important than any other kind of work. We all need to only look at being a young mom and know that time is not valued. That work is not valued. Being a stay-at-home mom, that work, I mean, we talk about it a little bit more, but really, is it valued the way it should be? No. So number one, it's not valued. Number two, it's an expectation. I don't think there's resistance to self-identifying as a caregiver. I think it starts most often, except maybe in like an emergency health situation, it starts off slowly and then it just grows. The demands just grow, the responsibility grows, the tasks that you have to do every day grow and grow and grow. When you're in it, you don't even feel that or see that. And then on the flip side, the healthcare system doesn't say, hey, you're the family caregiver. What do you need? You're going to go home and be the primary person taking care of them. How can we support you and do that? They don't do that. Sometimes they don't even acknowledge you. Sometimes they even question why why you're asking a question. So I think there's many reasons why people don't identify, both self-identify or are not identified as family caregivers. And then it's only when they get to a point of burnout where they're like, I need help. And then you start Googling, and you're definitely not Googling, what are the supports for family caregivers? You're usually like Googling something like, my husband is really sick, I need help. So it is about that familial relationship that I think is first and foremost people don't see when they've crossed the line from just being a spouse to being a family caregiver, or just being a daughter to being a family caregiver.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about your experience once you started to realize you were a family caregiver.
Well, I had the privilege of working with caregivers, so I knew from the outset that I would be a caregiver and that my mom would be a primary caregiver. That said, I remember very early on, one of the first appointments I went to with my dad, because he had primary progressive aphasia, which basically meant he was going to lose his language, and we knew that early on, or his ability to talk and to understand. And I remember going to a speech pathologist, and she said to me, she said, what do you do? And I said, well, I work in the healthcare system. Ironically, I work with family caregivers, and she said, well, how is this different? And I kind of looked at her, and then she looked at me, she goes, this is emotional. You're not going to have the same clarity when you're sitting beside your dad in an appointment that you do when you're doing your work. And at the time I was like, I don't know if I believe that. But the reality is, the emotions come into play. It's very emotional to watch someone you knew and love lose their capacity on different levels slowly. And so, I think I knew I was a caregiver. I kind of knew all the things, and still it's hard to remember to prioritize your own self-care. Remember to take the time, remember to take a break, and be able to support my mom, who was the primary caregiver. We could see her burning out, and we every time we would sort of see that next layer of burnout, we would step in and try and figure out, okay, how do we support her more? How do we support her more? How do we support her more? So, I mean, it's interesting. I definitely knew I was a caregiver, but just being in it, can sometimes be incremental, and you just don't realize that you're at that next stage of load, I guess, of caregiving. And we talk a lot about the mental load for moms and for parents. The mental load for sandwich generation caregivers is real. Like, it's like, okay, I have to book an appointment for my daughter, but I also have to book that appointment for my dad. I have to follow up with that. There's a list beside me right here because we've just moved my dad into long-term care, which was a hard decision. But there's now a whole bunch of things that I need to follow up on that I just haven't had time to do. Like, we put deposits on for a different kind of support that we might need. Now we need the deposit back, but all those things take time. And we need to order a bunch of things for his room. And I know it's on my to-do list to do that. And I just haven't found the time yet. So, it's intellectually, I know I'm a caregiver. Intellectually, I know all the things I'm supposed to do. And still the load is great. And so how do I figure out how to manage and prioritize those things? And often it's like, what is the burning house beside me that I need to pay attention to right now? What are the deliverables I have for work? I'm self-employed. I don't deliver. I don't get paid. So those things take priority. And then how do I prioritize, my own family here at home, my immediate family, and my family, my parents and my other siblings. And, it's a lot.
You're making me tired and making my brain hurt, actually.
I know.
No, it is a lot. Now, you mentioned thinking of it as a load, the next layer of load. What do you see in somebody else when you recognize that they've crossed into that next layer of load burnout? What would you notice as somebody observing that?
Ooh, that's a really interesting question because most of the caregivers I see when I work with them are ones who are already at that level of load. But I would say it is kind of that you would start to see the lack of prioritization of themselves, whatever it might be, like finding the thing that they love to do and they're not doing it anymore, or, the friend who joined the walking group and hasn't shown up for a month. Like those are the kinds of you start to see that the things that they want to prioritize, they can't prioritize anymore. I would say that's probably your biggest indicator if you're looking in your friend group and at your peers and your colleagues.
And what about yourself? Because this is where, if you don't have an observant friend or family member watching you carefully, what might you notice, or what are you on the lookout for with your own experience?
Oh, that's so interesting. I'll tell you, I can give you the example recently that actually pushed my body, actually physically pushed me to pay attention to what was going on. So I mentioned we just made the decision to put my dad into long-term care after we've been caring for him for 10 years. So, it's not been a short ride to this point. And that decision was so hard. And I have to say, my body was vibrating when I'd wake up in the morning, like literally vibrating. And it was basically my body saying, you need to do something with me today. You need to move me. You need to exert yourself. You need to do something to get rid of this horrible feeling, which was, I think, a level of stress and anxiety and worry all built up into one. So my body actually said, and it's funny because I've talked to friends in the last couple of weeks and they're like, we saw that the only way you got through that was through physical exercise in order to get rid of that in your body. And the other thing is, my own personal indication of stress levels is I'm an emotional eater, but when I'm so stressed, I don't eat. And I know that from when I went through infertility. When I got to those like really stressful points, I had no appetite. But usually my kind of primary MO is emotional eating. So once I hit that, I knew, I'm like, okay, I know where I'm at now because I have no appetite.
Wow, I'm thinking back to the one time I was experiencing, now I can see it was burnout, and my eyeballs hurt, and I never had that at all. I'm like, what is going on here? And it was a physical sign. And I'm grateful for that. But it was, thank God it wasn't too late, but it definitely had crossed the line. And so I'm wondering, do you think, I know this sounds ridiculously obvious that caregiving is stressful, but do you think when people are in it, they appreciate the amount of stress and their responsibility to take care of themselves?
I don't. And I'm going to talk to you about self-care because I am so tired of hearing about caregivers need to care for themselves. I'm like, yeah, nice, easy words. Try and make that happen. But I will say that when I got to that point of stress that I just described a few weeks ago, where my body was physically vibrating, it was forcing me to self-care. So I thought that was interesting because I can be very, very flippant about this whole self-care thing. I'm like, self-care is not what, yes, caregivers need, yes, but what they need to do self-care is respite. They need support. They need other people to help them out. So don't just tell them self-care is the way to go. But I will say that in those weeks where my body was like, I had to cancel other things in order to fit exercise in because I was not functioning if I didn't do it. Bottom line. So it's an interesting piece.
It is, because it kind of touches on this external versus internal accountability to yourself. Even though your body is technically internal accountability, like it's your body telling you something, it doesn't feel the same way. It's like you couldn't, there's such a challenge to make a commitment to yourself and honor it in the best of times, let alone
exactly
when there's stress and everything else. but your body was screaming
Yeah.
that it needed your attention, I guess. That's how I felt with my eyeballs. I'm like, okay, I
Yeah.
hear this now. I didn't hear it before. So
I get the eyeball twitch. Like that to me is also the other indication of stress and burnout. I would say the final one too, Susie, is like I could keep going as long as I was standing up. But if I sat down, I'd be like, okay, I'm done. Like I'm like, okay, I don't think I can actually get up again. So that degree of like physical exhaustion where your body I'd be like, I can't sit down because if I sit down, I'm not getting up again.
yeah,
I've got like a million things I need to do.
I totally hear that. I recently, in the last year, got this Aura ring, and I found it to be exceptionally helpful because it gives you black and white data that you can't argue with. It's like, oh, and one of the indicators is how quickly you fall asleep. And I fall asleep immediately, like with seconds, maybe a minute or two. And, that speaks to exhaustion, to pushing it a little bit, that you're falling asleep that quickly. I can't sit in a recliner or I will fall asleep.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't even watch my favorite show in a recliner.
Yeah, I hear you.
I love a recliner, but I cannot.
Me too. I love a recliner.
So it sounds like, and what I'm guessing is that one of the reasons it's so hard to rest, to give yourself a break, to take care of yourself, is because you can't even figure out how to do it. It's too complicated. The list is too big. What tips do you have to open up your mind about creative ways to solve it? Much like, carrying your laptop around helped you figure out how to do work the way that you could do it. For somebody who, like you, who's experiencing stress and anxiety and big decisions and exhaustion and the emotional aspect of it all, how can you take care of yourself?
Oy, oy, oy. That's such a hard question, honestly. I find I think I will say, based on this like latest kind of like acute period of caregiving that was very intense, where my body was like really not going to let me just sit, even though that's what I wanted to do. It does remind me that actually that self-care piece and prioritizing that through my kind of sustained stress, not the acute stress, is also important. So I think for me, that's one big thing, for sure. I think the other piece is, if we go back to the self-identifying part, is you can find supports. There are, I'm very open and transparent. There's not one person in my life that doesn't know I'm a family caregiver, maybe to my detriment, but I don't care. I'm like on a personal mission to make people understand that this is something you're facing every day. Everyone's going to face it at some point in their lives. And so I talk about it a lot. Like if people say to me, how are you? I am not the person that's like, oh, I'm fine. How are you? That's you ask me how I am, I'm going to tell you how I am. And I'm candid about it. I also think that's part of being 50. Like, I don't care anymore. I'm not here to put on a show. So I'm just honest about how I am. And I also have a group. I actually, ironically, maybe, the universe working in interesting ways, have a very close friend who's going through something very similar. So we just like have a call and how are you? And we say all the horrible things. And we, it's also very helpful because we know each other so well. So I can say, here's what I'm hearing. Have you thought about this? Like that kind of real. So that's my own built-in peer support. But, I do think if people identify as caregivers, there are caregivers around you that you can lean on for support. There's formal support groups and there's informal support groups. I think that's so important. And as I said, like, can we just be honest with each other? I'm not here to tell you I'm great if I'm not, but I'm also not going to put it on you. I'm going to tell you how I'm feeling. And, I think it's really important to talk about this more. And I think when we talk about working caregivers, so yes, I am self-employed, but my work in the last 18 months is focused on working caregivers in traditional employment. We're not talking about it at work. And where we are, people feel so supported to the point that we know that their retention rates staying in that organization are much higher. they come back and are even more dedicated, the over above and beyond. I'm never sure that's such a great thing. I thought it was great when I was in my 20s when I had the time, but now I'm like, no, I got to have my boundaries. But, people will go above and beyond when they feel supported like that at a time in their life when it's so challenging. So, I think we need to create an environment where we're talking about it. If we look at this right now, so the stats in Canada, which are similar around the world, honestly, because I've met with lots of caregiving organizations globally, 1 in 4 Canadians are caregivers right now. That is anticipated to grow to 1 in 2, primarily due to the aging population, but not only. Like, I think we think, oh, this is caring for your parents. No, it's not only that. It's many other things too. And 62% of those 1 in 4 right now are still employed. We're talking about a lot of people. 6.1 million Canadians are currently working caregivers. So if you think that this doesn't exist in your organization, think again and look a little closer and start asking those questions, because they're there and they're trying to figure it all out. And what we heard through the work we did last year is that many people silently quit. They don't tell them why they're quitting, but they've seen how others have been treated when they indicate that they have some kind of personal responsibility at home that's over and above the kind of typical responsibilities, and how they either were overlooked for promotions, or they were, performance managed, or they were all sorts of things. So people are afraid to speak up. And the reality is, Rosalind Carter said, there's only 4 types of people in this world. You're either going to be a caregiver, you are a caregiver, you have been a caregiver, or you're going to need a caregiver. So, like, when I'm talking about this, I'm not talking about someone else. I'm talking about you and I, and I'm talking about all of those people around me.
Wow. And most of that, the 1 in 4 are women.
So that's an interesting assumption. They aren't. They aren't.
Okay.
It is almost equal, but the types of tasks that women take on tend to be more physical, more demanding, and they tend to be the ones that take on the tasks as things get more intense. So we do know that more women either go part-time at work, retire early, or simply take a lower paying or lower responsibility job in order to manage everything they're facing. So although the numbers are reasonably equal, I think it's 54% women, 46% men. It's not that much of a difference, but the types of responsibilities that women take on tend to be higher, and they tend to be the ones that has a bigger impact on their career.
Oh, thank you for clarifying that. That's really important. Wow. Okay. So what can we do as somebody who is a caregiver, or somebody who is not a caregiver yet or has been a caregiver? How can we support caregivers?
Yeah. Well, I will say it again. First and foremost, we got to talk about this more, and we got to share our own experiences and not hide them. I think that that's incredibly important, because only through awareness and understanding can we drive change, number one. I think people in positions of authority, in people who are well-known influencers, they need to talk about this more, because that's where we're going to create that permission to talk about caregiving as a responsibility. Just a little anecdote. I was speaking to someone recently, asked me what I did. Of course, I talked about family caregiving, and he's like, oh, what do you mean by that? I was like, when someone in your family isn't well, so think about your parents as they're aging, you need to step in and care for them. He's like, I'm never doing that. And I thought in my head, good luck with that, because it's not often an option. He's like, no way. I mean, I'm the only one who's here close to my parents. My 2 siblings live out west, but I'm not going to do that. I was like, well, good luck when the day comes, because there's actually mostly not an option. It's not a choice in many, many cases. So I think we got to talk about it more. I also think we need, and we're working on talking about this kind of across the nation, how do we engage the C-suite in all types of organizations, in the private sector, in the public sector, in the nonprofit sector, to talk about what the future of work needs to look like in the context of working caregivers. And by the way, if you look at what Gen Z and Gen Alpha want from the workplace, it's exactly what working caregivers need. It's not necessarily, again, about working less. It's about working differently. It's about part-time employment with benefits. It's about enabling someone to go from full-time to part-time for a period of time where so that they can balance everything, but to have the security of being able to come back. Furthermore, do you know how many skills you gain as a working caregiver or as a caregiver in general? Do you know how much you need to learn how to navigate complex systems, advocate for what you need, creative problem solving, project management, financial management, all the things we need in the workplace? Caregivers are growing those skills in spades because typically the caregiving falls to the person who can do those things. So if you don't think those two things are aligned, you're missing out. I really think workplaces need to think about this, and those who are thinking about it have a competitive advantage at this point. And
Ooh, that's so good.
I think if we can just encourage more and more people to think about it, and we're working on that through my company, 4C Strategy, but in collaboration with the national organization here, the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence, we're working on bringing a corporate council together to really look at how we can talk about that, not just what do you do today, but actually look at this in the context of the future of work.
Oh, that is so interesting. Also to think about, well, just in general, but to think about Gen Z and Gen Alpha. I didn't even know that was a thing. So thank you for enlightening me. One of the things that you're very passionate about is the concept of joy, the joys of caregiving amidst the big challenges. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, I just want to kind of paint a picture of my dad. My dad is an immigrant. He came here when he was 19 or 20, and he had to find his way and support a young family. He became a father, not that long after he immigrated here. There's four of us, and he worked for 40 years straight, never missed a day of work, wasn't sick a day in his life, was the most independent guy. Honestly, I often say I'm the female version of him. I have a few more female traits, but Susie, you might recall that I worked very long hours when I worked with you. I was single, I didn't have a family, and it was the only model I'd ever seen. I was doing exactly what my dad had done.
Wow.
So I learned, by the way, don't worry, I've changed my but that was the model. That was my dad. He was dedicated to his company, and he never was sick a day in his life. I had conversations with my siblings to say, because, you think about what do you do if one of your parents dies? And we would kind of like have these lighthearted conversations. Well, what happened if mom died first? What would happen if dad died first? What would that look like, kind of thing. And we were like, oh, if mom dies first, dad will be a hermit. Like, we'll never see him because he's super independent and he just does his own thing. And that no one ever had to take care of him for a day in his life. By the way, we never talked about what would caring for one of our parents look like, because we were oblivious to the fact that we would even have to care, or that was even a thing. And now we're 10 years into caring for my dad. So if you had told me my dad was going to get frontal temporal lobe dementia and not have his brain capacity after his entire life was built on his ability, he was very intelligent guy, was quite successful, was able to kind of do anything. I was shocked. So what I've learned, and this is where I get emotional, is I learned that this guy who had everything was going to lose it, and I could still love him in a different way. Not the way I thought I was going to have a relationship with him in retirement. But I see this man who was so capable lose his capacities and be kind and gentle, and I can just be there with him in a totally different way. And I've learned so much through that. And I watch my siblings and my mom learn the same. Like it's just this, you have to learn how to love him in a different way. And even though he taught me so much about who I am and that drive and that like ability to be productive and all of those things, he lost all of that. And yet he's still this beautiful man who's my dad, even though he's not a typical father figure. And I don't know, I remember when he was diagnosed literally thinking, oh, I was looking forward to the relationship I'd have with my dad in retirement because he was such a workaholic. And now I won't have that. And it only took me a little while to turn around and be like, oh, but I'm going to have this whole other kind of relationship with him, which is not what I expected, but is equally beautiful. And I think you got to lean into that. And you know, I hear people talk about this toxic positivity around caregiving. I'm not talking about that, but you have to, I'm not saying it's all great. I'm just saying if you can lean into the beauty of the time that I've had with my dad in the last 10 years, that would have not looked like that. He would have traveled the world. He would have had maybe some time for us. I've had more time with him in the last 10 years than I did in the previous 40. It looks different and it feels different, but it's pretty incredible. The other thing I'll say, which I have really been really interested in, especially in the last little while. So my daughter has been around. Let me just clean myself up.
Yeah, we're both tearing up over here. Okay, big hug, big hug. Thank you so much for sharing that.
The other thing that I have found has been so interesting, and people talk about, again, in the caregiver world, you see this a little bit, is do you protect your children from this, right? My daughter has never known my dad the way I knew him. She only has ever known him in his illness, as my nieces and nephews are the same. And yet I've had these I made the choice not to protect her from it, you know, in an age appropriate way, of course, but, you know, she has seen and interacted with my dad. And we've had these profound discussions about the quality of life versus the quantity of life and what that actually looks like. And in the context of my dad, I always say, and she said, you can see it. I say, my dad's content. Is this what we thought my dad was going to be like at this age? No. But he is content, and that for him is quality of life. But when that changes, then we would have a different perspective on it. Because I lost a friend very suddenly a year ago. And so that prompted this discussion about the ability to say goodbye to my dad in a different way that I didn't get with my friend. And, you know, for her to be at 12, to be able to reflect on that, to me, is profound.
It is very powerful. Christa, thank you so much. You have shared so beautifully. I'm sure if you're listening, you're reflecting and thinking about how, you know, what you're thinking about when it comes to your parents, if you still have them alive, and if they passed like mine have, your thoughts might be a little different. Like I'm thinking, right, you're thinking about this relationship that you'll have with your father the way he is now, not what would have been. And I do find myself, my father passed when I was 12, thinking when I see other friends with parents in their 70s and 80s, to just be fascinated by relationships that they have with older men, with older parents. So it's very interesting to think about what you hoped might be your future, what you assumed would be your future, and have gratitude and joy and acceptance with what is, and to learn how to be present with that and how to really gain from it. And you really helped by sharing your story. So thank you so much for that. Is there anything else that you want to share on this topic?
I would just say that there's a global discussion around family caregivers. I'm always interested in hearing what people are doing around the caregiving, and especially right now around working caregivers. from around the world. I want to know what's happening. We got to do this better. So I'm really keen to connect with people who are interested in learning more or sharing what's happening in their area. And as you can see through the anecdotes I've shared, I really think it's important to use those real life stories to help people understand the impact on family caregivers, because I think that, along with all the data and information, is going to be what drives change going forward. So I guess that's all I would say, is I'm always keen to talk to people who are also thinking about these issues.
That's so good. And how can people best get a hold of you?
You can connect with me through my website, which is 4cstrategy.ca, the number 4, the letter C, strategy, all one word.ca, or Christa, Christa, at 4cstrategy.ca.
Terrific. And of course, I'll have those links in the show notes if you want to follow up and check it out. Christa, thank you so much. It was great to reconnect. And I just can't tell you how much I appreciate you just really sharing your story, taking the time with us to be so honest and so thoughtful about the challenges and opportunities with this common and challenging time of life for so many of us. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That's it for today's episode. I am so grateful that Christa shared her story with you and gave such great information to really help you think about what may be going on for you and for people you care about. I wanted to share another important quote from Christa about her experience. She said, "I always know the stress and demands are too much when the tears start flowing when I'm in the car. The door closes. I'm alone, often the only place I'm ever alone. And the tears just come. Sometimes it's immediate. Sometimes it's in reaction to a thought. Sometimes a song on the radio hits me in a different way. This first happened in my infertility journey. I'd often cry on my way to work and on my way home. It was my only safe, alone space. And when my caregiver journey for my dad started, it happened again." It's another powerful, authentic reality of how demanding and difficult being a family caregiver can be. And as you heard at the end of the interview, how it can also be a gift of time and a chance to, in Christa's words, embrace the beauty of complexity. One message you've heard throughout many of these episodes on the Women in the Middle podcast is the importance of taking care of yourself because, my friend, nobody else does. It's not that you're not loved, but it's just that you have this responsibility yourself. Tuning into your thinking, feeling your feelings, slowing down enough to notice what's going on in your body, finding time to relax and enjoy your life, even when times are tough, even when it's just a small thing here or there, even when you accept that you need to ask for more help. It's all critical for you to do. It's okay to ask for help. If you don't, as strong and amazing as you are, you just may crack under the heavy weight of it all, right? And then you can't help anybody. So I just love the idea of you having your own back and helping yourself this way. It's the best way. And as Martha would say, it's a very good thing. Okay, the Women in the Middle podcasts are all about how to love your life again after 50 and be more intentional about your life, right? That's the point. The focus is on coaching you to incorporate mindfulness as a regular practice. This is how you put yourself on your agenda. My focus as your midlife coach is to help you get unstuck, clear, and focused on your current values and priorities so you don't have regrets. I can help you create the success you're looking for because life is just too short to waste time spinning and thinking about what you can't do instead of what you can do. That's why I created the Women in the Middle Happiness Academy with you in mind, because it's a warm, supportive, and fun coaching community of like-minded women who embrace the gift of aging and grow forward together. It's totally possible to feel great about your roadmap to a more fun, meaningful, and regret-free next chapter. I want this for you too, so let's talk about it and see if the Academy makes sense for you this year. Apply and book your free, no-obligation consult momentum call at www.womeninthemiddleacademy.com. There are exciting new bonuses that you're not going to want to miss. And finally, for show notes and links, head over to www.susierosenstein.com and click the podcast tab and look for episode number 393. You'll also see links there for my new show, Women in the Middle Entrepreneurs. Thanks so much for listening. It's time for you to put yourself first, one thought at a time. I'm Susie Rosenstein, and I'll talk to you next week.